I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic Engineer gold mine in the Atlan District of Northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jordan Bateman, Communications Director for the Independent Contractors and Business Association. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
The Conference Board of Canada is concerned about housing starts in BC. I've heard there's 39,000 units being built right now, but can we expect that kind of construction in the future?
No. In fact, the Conference Board, which is an independent group of economists, about 100 of them working in Ottawa, they're predicting a downturn in BC housing starts over the next few years. This is pretty frightening when you think about it. Given the fact that we're seeing net migration into BC of about 40 to 50,000 people per year, every year, that's from both within Canada and from abroad. The idea that housing starts are going to fall 12% this year and then another 5.5% in 2018. How many times have we talked about housing affordability? And one of the necessary components to making homes more affordable is supply. Yet we're going in the wrong direction yet again.
Why will there be a downturn, or do we know?
Part of it is economics. So, the economy is going to slow slightly. The economic growth is going to slow slightly. So last year we saw 3.7% growth in BC's GDP, which was, about a point higher than anyone predicted. This year they think it'll be more like 2.5%. In 2018, they think it'll dip to 2.1, and I'd point out these numbers were done all before the Green NDP coalition, which, frankly, some of their red tape, some of their tax increases, I think, are going to further constrict growth. But yeah, we're going to see a cooling in the economy, which then means people don't have as much capital to throw around. We're also going to see an increase in interest rates, which means people aren't going to be borrowing as much money, and all these things are going to end up putting a lot of pressure on the housing market. And apparently we're going to see a downturn in these housing starts. Plus, let's not forget the most important thing, Jim. 2018 is a municipal election year, so any project that's even remotely controversial will get deferred, delayed, kicked down the road by municipal councillors who are more interested in re-election than in doing the right or hard thing for their community.
So what are the reasons for this expected downturn? Is this just an economic cycle, or is it the political situation in Victoria?
Well, these numbers are basically economic cycle numbers. This was done before we knew that we were going to end up with the Green NDP coalition government. These numbers may constrict even further once the full weight of that first budget comes through. We need to remember the NDP and Greens have agreed that taxes should increase on people or households making $150,000 a year or more. They call that a tax on the rich. I would point out that 2 teachers who are married and living together make $150,000 a year. So I'm not sure that those school teachers are really the elite 1%ers we need to be going after, but that is the NDP's plan. They also want to increase taxes on corporations. They want to increase the small business tax. I mean, tax increases across the board at a time when our competitors in the United States are lowering them. Definitely not great for our economic competitiveness.
Why would you want to increase taxes on small business? Because they're the people who generate the most jobs.
Well, the NDP and Greens fundamentally believe that corporations haven't been taxed at a high enough rate. Frankly, they believe that none of us have been taxed at a high enough rate. They've long advocated rolling back Gordon Campbell's very first tax cut, the 25% income tax cut back in 2001. They spent years, like a decade, trying to get that reinstated. So when you believe that, people aren't paying enough taxes and corporations aren't paying enough taxes, it becomes very easy to increase the rates. one would point out that we have, a $3 billion surplus. That's means, British Columbians were taxed for $3 billion more than we needed to run government. But, the NDP just see a chance to further increase the taxation rather than cutting it.
If housing starts are going to decline, will that make housing cheaper or less affordable?
Well, Conference Board of Canada says housing prices are going to continue to rise. It's a simple supply and demand thing, right? I mean, we're still going to see the usual influx of people into British Columbia every year. And, they need to live somewhere. We're also going to see millennials who want to, get their own places. So there is going to be that constant demand. And if the supply doesn't keep up with that demand, then, of course, prices end up going up.
I thought the Green NDP platform promised more affordable housing.
Well, affordable housing in their world means government-subsidized housing. The problem is there just aren't enough taxpayers to subsidize every single person who wants a home. You just can't afford to do it. So, their plan, I think they budgeted $400 million a year in their documents for affordable housing. More credible estimates have it as about $1 billion or $1.5 billion per year for 10 years to meet the kind of construction goals they have for subsidized housing. That, of course, would absolutely plunge BC into the red and create huge amounts of borrowing going forward.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after the break.
Bateman Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Bateman's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at batemanresources.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jordan Bateman. Jordan, what kind of confidence do you have in the cabinet that will be formed in BC? What's the attitude of the independent contractors and independent business people?
Well, we're very concerned about the kind of cabinet that John Horgan's going to put together. First of all, kind of the power brokers have very deep roots in the NDP, stretching back to those 1990s. Which were not good economically for British Columbia. So you have John Horgan. He was an aide in the 1990s to Glenn Clark and others. Adrian Dix will be a key cabinet minister. He was the chief of staff to Glenn Clark. Of course, famously backdated a memo in order to try to get his boss out of trouble and was fired for that. You have Mike Farnworth, who was a 1990s cabinet minister. You have Leonard Krog kicking around in IMO. He was a 1990s caucus whip for the NDP. And now you have them hiring so-called Mayor Meggs, Jeff Meggs, the Vancouver City Councillor, who spent the 1990s running around with NDP cabinet ministers, running NDP comm shops, before a long career as a union leader. So, not a lot of balance there, not a lot of small business owners in that caucus, certainly not a lot of resource workers in the caucus to choose from. So we expect a bunch of people with very deep union ties. Judy Darcy is another, massive connected to the public sector unions. She'll probably get a key role. These are people who may be looking out for their union buddies more than they're looking out for the actual people of British Columbia.
Now, NDP governments in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, I believe, have been totally different than BC, where they always work closely, especially with small business. And in some cases, they avoided recessions because of that close work between management and the workers. Can we expect that kind of cooperation or that style of NDP government in British Columbia?
I don't think we can, and certainly not with Jeff Meggs playing such a key role. And we need to sit back and think to ourselves, right? These are people who have been out of power for 16 years. John Horgan 4 years ago in the election that Adrian Dix should have won but lost. The next morning he was on Alex Sakoumas's long lamented radio show, and was emotional on the air. Sounded like he was actually fighting back tears as he talked about how the NDP punted that election. These are people who are desperate for power, crave power. After 16 years in the wilderness, they so badly want it. The last thing they're going to do now that they have it is work with people who they've perceived as their political opponents for many years. They're going to go completely the other way. I think they're going to double down on their union connections and try to reward all those people who were with them in those wilderness years. I think that's very dangerous for British Columbia because, we need balanced government. Say what you want about Christy Clark. She did manage to get some unions to actually endorse her. She reached out, tried to reach out to those unions who had traditionally opposed the BC Liberals. She built some bridges there. Not with, the BC Teachers Federation or the BC Government Employees Union, but certainly with, the steelworkers, the bridge builders, groups like that. Not the steelworkers, the bridge builders, the ironworkers, pardon me. But, they have, they tried to kind of bridge that gap, but, when you're out of power for 16 years, you lose a lot of your, ability to be, kind and gentle with your opponents. I think the NDP government will be all about rewarding their friends and punishing their enemies.
Is that a backwards way to look at modern government?
Oh, completely. And the irony here, it flies completely in the face of all the things that Andrew Weaver talks about, government should be doing. Dr. Weaver and these two Green NDP MLAs are going to get quite an awakening as they see the NDP in power. The things that the kid gloves the NDP treat them with now will quickly come off if the Greens start doing things the NDP disagree with.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario. With grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold, a drill program will commence this spring to test the numerous targets located by recent groundwork. For more information, visit our website, rmroyalty.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're talking with Jordan Bateman. Jordan, have you heard how the NDP Greens plan to pay for all their social policies, especially if they cancel Site C and the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which would be a $19 billion hit to the BC economy?
Well, their plan at first will be to spend the big surplus that the BC Liberals left. They'll spend every nickel of that $3 billion or so that, Mike DeYoung and Christy Clark managed to put together. That will buy them a lot of space. The economy should still be, despite reduced growth numbers, should still be reasonable, growing reasonably in the next year. That will also give them a bit of space. But you're right. Like, Jim, one of the problems with spending, or one of the problems with betting on surpluses is surpluses are one-offs. You have it for 1 year and then it's gone, and the next year may or may not result in another surplus. Program spending, though, goes on forever. You bring in a $10 a day daycare plan, you'll be funding that forever. Subsidized housing, that's a forever cost. More teachers, more frontline social workers, all wonderful things to have, but there is an ongoing cost to that. And, in a time when they're raising taxes and they're going to be, quite plausibly constricting economic growth, that's a lot of problems for them to pay for these things that they've promised long term.
Have you heard about how they might try to pay for these social housing projects?
No, they'll try to partner with different groups, and that will contribute some money. But even then, there's a cost to taxpayers. I mean, they expect municipalities to kick in the vast majority of the land for all these different projects. Well, land isn't free. That's a cost to property taxpayers. Either they'll have to buy land or they'll have to replace the land holdings. So there'll be costs there deferred onto property taxpayers. Very difficult for me to figure out how they're going to pay for the kind of construction they're talking about without going into massive debt. But, the NDP and Greens, they don't believe in balancing the budget every year. They give lip service to balancing the budget in quote-unquote business cycles. And they may just say, hey, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, that's a new business cycle, and not even worry about the deficit. So, yeah, that surplus will disappear quickly. It'll certainly buy them a year or two of happy announcements, but once those program costs start to embed themselves year after year, and if we do face the kind of slowing growth that the Conference Board of Canada predicts we will, they may find themselves in trouble sooner than later.
What can BC's natural resource extraction businesses expect from an NDP Green government?
Well, more red tape. Andrew Weaver's made no qualms about the fact that he plans to choke out as many of these polluters as possible, as he calls them, using red tape. That's his plan for Kinder Morgan. That's, LNG he doesn't even believe exists, even though billions of dollars have been invested by, real live companies into that industry, despite the fact that the United States and Australia and Qatar are all, ramping up LNG production. LNG could be a huge contributor to our provincial economy, but Andrew Weaver will try everything he can to stop it. The NDP, that'll be interesting. They'll be split on it. There are people, and I'd put Horgan in this camp, who probably don't mind LNG and certainly think that, blue collar jobs are a worthy pursuit and something that needs to be encouraged. But they also have, the environmentalist forces of no within their caucus. And in this kind of government where every single seat counts, they're going to have to kowtow to the weakest link in their party. They're going to have to kowtow to the person who is, most adamant against resource development, and that's really scary news for the thousands, tens of thousands of British Columbians who rely on that industry for work.
Is there a big divide between urban BC and outlying BC? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, if people in urban BC haven't read, energeticcity.ca, go to the Alaska Highway News website, go to the Facebook pages for some of these northern communities, and just look at what the North thinks of what the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island are doing right now. And, the North isn't wrong. We live off, in Lower Mainland, we live off a lot of the spoils and benefits of responsible resource development, of the blue-collar work that goes on around the rest of the province. And we take for granted the benefits that flow to us. Well, the North, as Game of Thrones says, the North remembers. The North knows that this is happening and are tired of it. And you've seen this huge political divide now with BC Liberals virtually everywhere in the province except, the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island. And the NDP unable or unwilling to, even campaign elsewhere. John Horgan hasn't been to Fort St. John in 2 years. Where Site C is happening, and yet he's threatening to put 2,200 people out of work there. That's appalling, and he should be embarrassed, and he should be on the next plane to FSJ to look those people in the eye and explain why their jobs aren't that important to him. That kind of divide needs to be addressed, and it's one that will be very difficult for, the NDP and Greens, who are, completely centered around Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland.
I recall before the last election, Adrian Dix met with something like 400 business leaders to try to make sure there would be a smooth transition if he won the election and that business shouldn't have to worry about the NDP. Was any such effort made before the latest election?
I'm unaware of any such effort. I do know that Horgan and his people have met at least with the BC Business Council president, Greg Davignon, at some point. But no, there's been no real outreach here. And in fact, most of the announcements we see so far are causing major concerns to business communities. Vancouver Board of Trade surveyed their members. 70% feel less confident in the economy since Horgan and Weaver took over. That to me is probably a pretty good barometer of where most business people stand at this point.
Now, we have Dr. Weaver of the Greens not very positive about BC resource extraction. Meanwhile, I have Stuart Muir from the Resource Council, a pro-resource extraction done the right way kind of thing. He's invited to conferences all over the world to explain how BC has been gentle on the environment while still mining. Do the people in the current government understand that BC's actually a world leader when it comes to environmentally correct mining?
What's the old biblical saying? A prophet is without honor in his hometown. That really applies to us. I mean, when you compare BC's responsible resource development industry with things going on around the world, I mean, you just set aside the human rights issues, comparing us to, some of these other places that, extract oil and natural gas, where, we're far ahead of them, and, we're not throwing, we're not throwing gays and lesbians off roofs. We're not, beating our own people. We're not treating, minorities as second-class citizens. Take all the human rights issues out of the way, and just go to straight environmental. BC has some of the cleanest high standards in the world. Frankly, that's one of the things that slowed LNG slightly here is, the fact that we've demanded that high level of environmental protection. The people who complain here are, well, not to go all Vivian Krause on everyone, but there is a deep belief within the resource industry here in British Columbia that the people who complain about resources in BC are being funded by Americans, and it has very little to do with the environment and everything to do about American protectionism and protecting American jobs over Canadian ones. Because if you actually looked at the resource industries around the world, there are a hell of a lot more places where people should be protesting and demanding change than in British Columbia, which has pristine standards, deep dedication to human rights, and is precisely the kind of responsible resource development that should be going on everywhere in the world. If these folks really wanted to make meaningful change, they'd be protesting other places around the world, not here.
Jordan, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks for having me.
My guest has been Jordan Bateman, Communications Director for the Independent Contractors and Business Association. If you have any questions for the show or our guests, you can email us at info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.